Are you the fanatic we're looking for? Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is the only interactive and dynamic mock draft simulator. Dynamic means that the picks from one mock draft will influence the players that team selects in the next mock draft. This can be done with a first-round challenge. This can be done with a second-round challenge. This will be done with any mock draft from the Draft Professor. In addition, the Draft Professor has rank players functionality, allowing you to rank players and build your own big board and then compare your board to that of other users at the Draft Professor. In addition, the Draft Professor has draft a team functionality. This allows 2 or more users to snake draft a team of 22 players from the rookie pool, and then you can debate which players you like at which position and why. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Well, greetings and welcome to Tuesday. So on this episode of Mrs. R Relevant, I am going to demonstrate how the player boards move on the mock draft simulator. The 2 teams I'm going to be playing around with right now are the Saints and the Lions. And there's a couple of reasons why, but I'll get into that. So the first thing I want to do is do a 7-round draft for the Saints. And specifically, I want to pay attention to who I select in the 3rd round of the draft and the 4th round of the draft. So we're going to go in, let the simulator start up, do its thing. I'm using all of the default settings. The default settings for the simulator should treat you reasonably well. But I'll also talk about what some of the other advanced settings do as we go forward with this. So I'm going to do Burden in round 1 to the Saints. And then 2nd round, what's the best offensive lineman? I'm going to do Trapilo. So Trapilo is currently 64th on the player board. I'm selecting him in round 2. Okay. So I believe the Saints have 2 third-round picks. And that's what I want to pay attention to next. So we're going into round 3, and I want to focus on a couple of things. So we see one Saints 3rd-round pick here, and I'm scrolling down, and they have another 3rd-round pick a little bit further down. Okay, so what I'm going to do is look maybe towards the back of the draft card, and I'm going to look to say, well, is there anybody back here that would be a reasonable 3rd-round pick? So I'm trying to find somebody that's pretty low but could be considered maybe a 3rd-round pick. Okay, so here's one, Joshua Gray. I want you to observe that he's ranked 353 on the Saints board, okay? I'm taking him in round 3. Okay, so at this point, the Saints have taken 2 offensive linemen and a wide receiver, and I'm going to filter on corners, and I'm looking again for a corner maybe close to the bottom. So let's say Devin Kirkwood in round 3. Again, he's ranked 284. Okay, so paying attention to Gray and Kirkwood to the Saints. And then I'm also going to pay attention to who I select in the 4th round here. I'm going to go probably some type of defensive lineman. And again, I'm looking further down. So like Tonka Hemingway, okay? And he's 240, and I'm taking him in round 4. Okay, and I'll finish up the draft. And we're going to remember Gray, Kirkwood, Hemingway to the Saints. Okay, and it's going to take it a minute. It always seems to go slower when I'm on a podcast. This is also so every single pick that I make, these players moved up the draft board. So every team has its own player board. So the players you pick move up your team's player board. That's how the simulator is designed. So this is about the fifth different algorithm that I've used on the simulator over the last 3 years. This is definitely better than the 4 that came before it. As far as getting the players to move up, it's going to be harder to get a round 1 player to move up than it is a round 7. So rounds 4 through 7, the players should move to the top of the board relatively easily. So that was Jacory, Kroski, Merritt in round 6. And what I will do is I will go to team needs over here while it's finishing up. And on the team needs section of the site, every team has its own section here, and it's going to take it a minute to load. I apologize for the speed. Okay, so if we go to the Saints right over here, you can see there have been 55 mock drafts done for the Saints. Okay, you can see that here. And then over to the right of that, you can see a player list. This is the Saints player board. So if I look at the Saints player board, and specifically, I'm going to look at where Gray, Kirkwood, Hemingway are. So if I look up Joshua Gray, okay, so hasn't moved him up yet. Has it moved Hemingway up? I may have to verify this. Yeah, so it hasn't moved the players up because the draft hasn't finished yet. Okay. So I'm going to download that in case I need to come back and remember who I picked. But focus on Gray, Kirkwood, Hemingway to the Saints. And I'm going to refresh the page here. Let's go search up Gray. Okay, Gray didn't move. Did Hemingway move? Hemingway didn't move. Okay. So you can see the grades. And then what I am going to do next is do another mock. And this time I'm going to do a different team. So I'm going to do a 7-round mock, just like I did before. And I want to see who the Saints took. So I'm going to pick for the Lions. And I'm going to pay attention to who the Saints took in the mock draft for the Lions. And this is what's meant by a dynamic mock draft simulator. Okay, so round 1, it's going to be difficult for a player to move up. So I think, so Burden wasn't even the top player on the board. So if we look at who the Saints took here, the Saints are still taking Jackson Dart in round 1 because Burden would need to be picked several times to move higher than Dart. Okay, so if I am the Lions, who am I taking in round 1? If Egbuka is there, that seems like a pretty good pick to me. And then if we look at who the Saints took in round 2, so they took Izaraku. And again, I took Trapilo, but Trapilo wasn't the top player on the board. And to get a player to move up to the top of the round 2 board is going to take more than one mock. Okay, so what would the Lions do? I'd like Tate Ratledge to the Lions in round 2. Okay, so now we're in round 3. And this is where the Saints had 2 picks. Okay, and I just saw Trapilo go. So check this out. So in round 3, and the Lions don't have a 3rd round pick, so I've got to wait for it to get to the next Lions pick, and then I'm going to scroll back up and show you who the Saints took. This is the power of the dynamic mock draft simulator. Okay, so the Saints in round 3, Donovan Jackson was taken. I didn't pick him, but he was pretty high on the Saints board. Okay, but then the next Saints pick was Trapilo. That was a player I took. Okay, now I took Trapilo in round 2. The simulator just took him in round 3, and that's because me picking Trapilo did not make him higher than Donovan Jackson. Okay, but it did move him up the board high enough that he was the best player available for the Saints here. And then if we look at the round 4 picks, Noel Williams, was that one of the guys I took? I took Kirkwood. So let's see if it took Kirkwood or Hemingway. And then it took Kyron Lacy. So it didn't take the players that I took in round 4. So there will be times that it's immediate. And it really just depends on how far down. I picked players that were pretty low on the player board in round 4, right? I made it a point to go like all the way down to the bottom of the draft card to find the players. Let's continue with the Lions mock. And I'm going to go Will Howard to the Lions. And we'll finish this draft out, and we'll kind of keep paying attention to who did the Saints take. So what were the Saints picks? So Saints had pick 110, 128, 185. So 110, I think we already covered that, but I'm going to verify. It was 110 Lacy. Okay, 110 was Williams. 128 was Lacy. 185. Have we gotten to 185 in this mock yet? Not yet. Okay, so what are we going to do here for the Lions? Okay, so offensive line. So again, as it comes to pick 185, I'm paying attention to, did the Saints take a player that I just took? So it took Mello Dotson, so that was not a player I just took. So in this situation, I was like 1 for 9. 1 out of the 9 players that I took for the Saints. And then the next Saints pick was 253. Okay, and then what do I have left? Okay, edge, Rucker. So the main point of a dynamic mock draft simulator, whenever you see like that and like the ads before the podcast, the players that one person picks when they're mock drafting for a team, there is a likelihood that they are taken when somebody does a mock for another team. The person who drafted for the Saints is kind of controlling the Saints mock draft as long as the Lions mock drafter doesn't pick them before the Saints pick. Okay, so linebacker. Okay, and that was 253. So we're not even there yet. Okay, we've done wide receiver. I want to see who the Saints pick at 253. We're not there yet. So as it's going through to pick 253, let's go to round 7. Scroll down to pick 253. And Jacob Parrish was not one of the players I took for the Saints this time either. Okay, so observe again. I will download that graphic in case I need to come back to it for who did I take for the Lions. Okay, so some other advanced mock drafts that you can do. Okay. So the simulator is something called the first round challenge. That's what this is right here. First round fanatic challenge. What this is 5 unique first rounds. So I'm going to do, let's see, I'm going to go Bengals. Okay. And I'm going to mess around a little bit so that I can demonstrate something. And one of the reasons I'm picking on the Bengals is I know that there are a lot of people out there using the Bengals. So anything I do to manipulate the Bengals player board, I am sure that there are users of the simulator that are going to come back and fix it. So I want you to observe that Egbuka is 41st on the Bengals player board. Okay. And I'm going to pick him in round 1. So the simulator is going to go, and it just did a 1-round draft. And now it's going to kick me into a second 1-round draft. So I'm already into the second 1-round draft, and the simulator makes sure that Egbuka is taken before the Bengals pick. So another player to talk about is Matthew Golden. I want you to observe he's 165. So I just took him in round 1 to the Bengals. Okay, so what does the simulator do? This is the third mock draft. The simulator makes sure that Egbuka and Golden, the 2 players I've taken in round 1 in the first mock and the second mock, are off the board before the Bengals pick. So another player, look at Jaden Higgins. He's 107. Okay, so I'm going to take him to round 1 to Cincinnati. Okay, and then let's say Savi and Williams in round 1. Notice that he's 178. Okay, and then the last player I will take will be Nick Scourton right here, and observe that he's 14th. Okay, so the simulator just finished, right? So that was 5 unique 1-round drafts for the Bengals, right? Okay, so let's come over here, and we're going to go to team needs. And we're going to scroll to the Bengals. And what we're going to see when we go to the Bengals, you can see they've done a lot of mock drafts. So shout out to Bengals and Brews, Ryan Sparks, and everybody that follows them for giving the simulator a try. Okay, so let's look. One of the players I took was Egbuka, right? So Egbuka was 40-something when I took him. He moved up to 34. Next player was Golden. Matthew Golden moved up to 65 by me taking him in round 1 once. I don't remember his exact ranking, but I believe it was like 165. The next receiver I took was Higgins, right? And you can see Jaden Higgins, he was 120-something when I took him. He moved up to 63. And Savion Williams was another. He moved up to 66. Okay, so when you take a player on this simulator, in any round, they're moving up. Now, the first round, it's going to be difficult for me to get any of those guys up to the top. It will take a little bit of work. When I say a little bit of work, somewhere between 10 and 50 mock drafts to get the player to go all the way to the top. It's just going to depend on a lot of things for me to be able to specifically tell you how much, and there's a lot of math involved. I'm just going to tell you, it's not going to be one mock draft to get them going to the top of the player board in round 1. You're definitely going to need to be a fanatic and do a lot of mock drafts. If you want to get the player you want all the way to the top of your team's round 1 player board, you're going to need to be prepared to do between 10 and 50 mock drafts. Okay. In rounds 4 through 7, you have the end user is significantly more control. Most of the time, it should take 1 or 2 mock drafts to get somebody, let's say, to go to the top of the 4th or the 5th round player board. Okay, and then the last player I took for the Bengals was Scourton. And he moved up to 9th. I don't remember exactly where he was, but I want to say he was at about 11, and me picking him moved him up to 9th. Okay? So no matter how you choose to mock draft, so meaning that if you're coming in and you've seen me do a first-round challenge here, you saw me do 7-round mocks for the Saints and for the Lions. It doesn't matter whether you're doing one of these or any of the advanced stuff down here. The player boards are moving in all of it. Okay? So if you have any questions on that, my X handle is at the bottom, and it's the same channel on YouTube. Okay? Drop a comment on YouTube. Drop a comment on X. Drop a comment in Discord if you're watching this or you found me on Discord. And I would be happy to answer those questions. So let's do a couple more mocks. This time, I'm unselecting what I selected. There we go. Okay. So the next team I want to do, let's do Houston. Okay, and when I do Houston, let's talk about what these buttons right here do. Okay, there's 3 dimensions to the randomness. You can control any one of the 3. And the 3 that I'm talking about are depth, randomness, and round depth. Okay? So draft card depth is set to 8, randomness is set to 2, round depth is set to 5. Okay? The one that's going to have the most influence is this one that is set to 2. And notice how it's set to low. I'm going to bump this up. Okay, so what did I just do? So the default was 2. That means that 2 of the 31 teams will not select the top player on their draft card. When it's set to 16, it's saying that 16 of the 31 teams that I'm not drafting for are going to skip picking the top player on the draft card each round. And each round, it's going to change which teams get that applied. When those teams don't select the top player in their draft card, at least one of the teams is going to go all the way down to the 8th player on the draft card. Okay. The rest of the teams are going to be picking some player between 2 and 8 on the draft card. They will not select the top player. Okay. So let's do a 5-round draft for the Texans. And I'll be able to show you at the end of the mock which teams didn't select the top player. It's pretty easy to see when you look at the player grades. So I picked the Texans. So the Texans will go with Buka in round 1. In round 2. Oh, that's right. They don't have a second round pick. So they're, oh, this they do. Let's go Capehart. And I believe I said I was going to do 5 rounds. So we'll let this finish, and I will show you how you can tell which teams did not select the top player on their draft card. It's easiest to see at the end of the draft. If I really wanted to calculate it right now, I could, but it's much easier at the end. So you may not notice too much with the randomness. I think a couple players fell. I was not expecting to get Chris Paul in round 3. I was definitely not expecting DJ Giddens to be available when I picked in round 4. So the randomness, I think, influenced those 2 players right there. Frazier. And this is the 5th round, so that should finish the mock. Okay, so if you look, like how many of us had Tet McMillan going 1st overall, right? So do you see how the grade is an A and it's not an A+? That's how you can tell which teams didn't take the highest player. So 1st overall went Tet McMillan, okay? Will Johnson, you see how it's an A and not an A+, was not the top player on the Patriots board. Walter Nolan was not the top player on the Jets board. Mason Graham was not the top player on the Raiders board. Ravel is not the top player on the Saints board. Okay? So you should ask yourself, like, even if it's not selecting the top player, is that still a good pick for that team? It's looking, if it doesn't grab the top player, it's looking 2 through 8 on the draft card. So it's going to be a player that's either 1 through 8 is the way that the algorithm is designed. It has to select a top 8 player. If it doesn't select the top player, it's got to go 2 through 8. Okay? So pay attention to, again, like Hairston going in round 1. Shamar Stewart going to the Chargers was not the top player. And you're like, okay, well, Jim, that sounds pretty cool, but that round one is too crazy. Okay. So, okay, well, let's come back in. Let's do another 5-round mock. Let's take that randomness up to 16, but this time let's flip on first round BPA. So what this does is it overrides. So first of all, I overrode the default. So the default is 2. I overrode it and said, okay, I want 16 teams to not select the top player. Okay. But now I'm going to override my override. That's what this is. Round 1, every team take the top player. Rounds 2 through 5, random. Round 1, take the top player. So if you don't like how crazy it got in round 1, and my suggestion is as we get closer to the draft in April, that's when you flip this on. So right now, we're the season's not even over with, right? We still have 8 teams left in the playoffs. So right now I would leave the randomness up because we don't know really who's picking who. Free agency hasn't happened yet. I think it's okay to have randomness up. But as you get closer to the draft in April, I think most people can tend to predict this team is going to select one of these 3 players in round 1. We don't want it going to the 8th player on the draft card in round 1, right? So that's what first round BPA is supposed to do. So we're going to do Houston again. 5-round draft. And we will let this thing fly. So I'll do Egbuka. Did I really see that? I was just checking something. Okay, it was a different Shamar. I saw Shamar Turner. I thought that said Shamar Stewart. That was my bad. Okay, and then they don't need a corner. Okay, we'll try to finish this up pretty quickly. And what I'm going to end up doing here at the end of this draft, I will show you what the round 1 looks like. And we should see A pluses all the way down round 1 because A plus is the visual indicator that the simulator selected the top player in the player board. And here's what I mean by that. So if I select Kaiser here, he's the top player in the player board, right? See how Kaiser's grade was an A+? It's because he was the top player on the player board. So I had first round BPA on. So if you notice, all of the round 1 grades are A+. Every single one of them. And that's the indicator, that's the visual indicator to the user that the team selected the top player on its player board. Okay. Now, I get a B, right? You can see Egbuka gets a B because he was not the top player. right? So that's why that grade was a B. He was somewhere between player 9 and 16 on the draft card at the time I picked him. That's why he's a B. Okay? But if we go to round 2, now you'll see 1 team, 2 teams, 3 teams, 4. Oh, I didn't scroll all the way to the top. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're not selecting the top player. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That was my pick. 16 teams did not select the top player on their draft card. Now, when they didn't select the top player, does it still look like a good pick? Would Membu going to the Eagles make sense? Somebody for the Eagles has picked Membu in round 2 more than once. That's how he got to that spot of the draft card. Okay. Same concept here. Emmanwori to the Buccaneers. That doesn't feel like a bad pick. This is about where Emmanwori should go in the draft. Somebody for the Buccaneers has picked him and more than likely picked him more than once in round 2 for him to get to that spot of their draft card. Okay. So every single player gets to where they are in the draft card by fans picking them. Okay. Because each time they pick them, they move up. Okay. And the algorithm is trying to select the top player on the draft card for every mock draft. So I could keep talking about this for a really long time. But what I would prefer that you do is give the simulator a try, draftprofessor.com. And then if you have questions on what some of those buttons do, please ask. You can ask me on Twitter at NFL Draft Fanatic. You can ask me on Discord. I believe it's Jim Draft Professor, I think is my Discord handle. Or you can drop a comment on YouTube, and I will usually see the comment first thing in the morning. So on behalf of everybody at Draft Professor, thank you very much for watching. Hope you have a great Tuesday, and I will see you on a podcast again tomorrow. Thank you for watching this episode of the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. Please follow the Draft Professor on YouTube, X, and Twitter at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. If you have a moment, try using some of the Draft Professor mock draft functionality, including a first-round challenge, a second-round challenge, rank players, and draft a team. Thank you very much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you on our daily draft podcast tomorrow.